Can you all hear me okay? Great, all right. So before we have the coffee then, this is the Tech Bros presentation. I've never thought of myself as a tech bro until this morning when it was first raised. My staff profile at AMS described me as an archaeological geophysics veteran, which as a 45-year-old man, I feel was a bit of a backhanded compliment, but it means I know what I'm talking about in terms of geophysics. Less so on the thermal, so I'm just sort of introducing a few slides here before I hand over to my tech bro, Liamóg. And I suppose we'd describe him as an early career researcher. He's been looking for the first time in Ireland at the use of thermal imagery and applying that to archaeology, and done a lot of work on that. And I've basically seen that as an opportunity to solve a few issues. So the bulk of the talk is going to be with Liamóg. The background to this, and this is very much our story of how we got into thermal imagery in Ireland. I was doing a survey over at this chimney stack. This is Ireland's version of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. We can't quite see it there, but it's quite an angle. And the Office of Public Works commissioned me to do a survey at the base of it and just see how deep it is so that they can work on ways of sort of shoring it up and so forth. So that was my job. I was busy doing a survey over there. And Liamóg was going to fly his drone, do some ortho photography, 3D modeling, because when you're working at a site like that, why not? And so he was flying over the cemetery that you can see just over there. And he just said, look, do you mind if I try this new thermal camera that I've got? And I'm always keen for stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, sure. Let's see what we get. And I was really surprised and very pleased. So the key thing to draw your attention is these are graves. These are known graves, the ones in green. They're known graves, headstones, stones, markings. Unmarked burials, we're getting, I don't know if you can see the contrast there in purple. They're marked up in blue on that diagram. Up here, a number of unmarked graves. So there's no headstone, no curbstone. There's not even a dip in the topography. We didn't know it was there. It's just a blank space. And this is great because this is showing up something that James Lyle touched on yesterday, geophysics. Graves really hard to detect. No magnetic field as such. Very little contrast. We can use radar and resistance and electromagnetic techniques. We want a combination of them, but generally they're really hard to find. And yet they're showing up really clearly here. So I'm thinking, all right, there's moisture contrasts here. That's good. We should really see, can we apply that to other realms of geophysics as well? So the thermal aspects of which I'm not an expert on, this is how it works. It's looking at the thermal contrasts from the background soils. So in that relation, in that sense, it's the same as all other geophysics. It's all about contrast. That's what we're looking at. Background soils are generating some type of thermal imagery, and an archaeological feature is creating something else, be it stone, a ditch, moisture retaining, and so forth. And it depends on the conductivity, the capacity, emissivity, and all these things as well. And obviously in Ireland, we have quite wet soil, so that plays a role too. So its potential has long been recognised, but it's not really developed too much, certainly not in Ireland. It's been used all over the world, but very much lacking research in the Irish context until Liamóg came along. So we had this success with Clare Abbey. And then he looked at other places. We've got this lovely enclosure ditch all around here. You just see that around Rathbone Mound, which is a big ancient royal site that we have very famous. So we're able to confirm and find a ditch. We've got a ring fort, circular ring fort there at Port Skiing, showing up really nicely. So again, yeah, confirming stuff that we already know. And then the one at the end, contrasts are a little different on this. This is a souterrain. So souterrain is a cave, if you like. Construction, and it's inside a cashel. So the cashel, circular enclosure made of stone, a walled enclosure, was known about. The souterrain, completely unknown. So the thermal imagery identified a previously unrecorded souterrain, and then we then confirmed, or Liamóg then conferred that on the ground. I used we a lot, the royal we. It's actually Liamóg was doing it. So he found this, and such was his success with all this. He wrote it all up and got it published last year. So yeah, this is great. Let me research it. So I'm then thinking, brilliant. How can I use this technique and exploit this technique? So one of the issues I have in Ireland is a lack of contrasts on some soils. Where we have wet soils, clay soils, glaze, alluvium, and peat, magnetometry doesn't tend to work well. This is a ring fort, circular enclosure ditch. It shows up really well over here in the resistance data. Magnetometry, not so much coming through. And this is a problem we often encounter. Where magnetometry works well, beautiful, it's lovely, we all love it, we don't need to look at pretty pictures of when it works. It's when it doesn't work, we have these challenges. And typically we'd say, all right, we'll use earth resistance then, or electromagnetic induction, and that will solve it. But they take much longer time to acquire the data than magnetometry, which is fast and therefore cheap. So we're looking for alternatives all the time. And so I'm thinking, this thermal set, this might plug a bit of a gap here. We have another problem, not all over Ireland, but certain contexts, a similar sort of thing, a lack of contrast when you're excavating. So a ditch feature, for example, may not visually contrast well against the background soil. It might be sort of a yellow, sandy, clayey material, and it's very difficult to see. It may require a good deal of weathering, a few days of rain, for example, before it shows up. Which means if you're in the commercial world and you're doing rapid test trench assessments, where you're digging the trench, looking in the trench, and you're backfilling it, often within the same day, you're not getting a chance for those features to weather. You're not necessarily seeing any actual features in the ground. And again, Liamóg has been saying when it's been sort of demonstrating that actually you can see things in the thermal imagery, even in the test trench, that the archaeologists can't see with the naked eye. So we're seeing these contrasts. But then everyone would say, yeah, actually, if you go stand over there, you'll see the feature, or at least you should be able to. So as part of AMS, we're the geophysics and remote sensing wing. So we're a small part of a larger company. It basically affords us the opportunity of, again, what James Lyle was saying the other day, serendipity, which is something Liamóg and I were talking about the past few days. The fact that we're able to go out to sites that we surveyed with geophysics while they're being excavated. Actually look at our anomalies and yeah, it turned up, it was a bit, no, it didn't. Where are the successes, where are the failures, and adapt our own interpretations and our own knowledge base. That means we've got a feedback loop, and we're working with all these other departments as well. And it means we get to regularly visit excavation sites and see what exactly is there. So what I'm going to do now is just hand over to Liamóg, and he's going to talk us through a few case studies of where this is now applicable in Ireland. So Liamóg.
Thank you very much, James. As James mentioned, my name is Liamóg Roche, and I've been interested in examining the potential for thermal imaging, UAV-based thermal imaging as a subset of archaeological remote sensing in Ireland. And so, because of our work with AMS, I've been afforded the opportunity to carry out a variety of thermal surveys on a variety of sites across Ireland. And so I suppose the first thing to talk about is a little bit about the equipment itself. So because of the different types of work that we carry out, and survey work such as orthography and small-scale LiDAR surveys, we've a somewhat larger drone, not quite as large as the UAVs that Stefano was showing earlier, but still there. But what we're mainly interested in is the interchangeability between the actual payloads or cameras, just because this allows us to deploy different methods quite quickly. So in this instance, we have the option of an orthography camera, which is the P1, a LiDAR camera, a LiDAR sensor, which is the L1, and for the purposes of this, our main interest is the high-resolution thermal camera of the H20T. Then we also have some reflective ground control points. These are coated with aluminium tape just to increase their visibility in the thermal data and allow more accurate alignment. So I suppose the first site to introduce you to the first case study, where the most fitting one is probably Cuilafúca in County Wicklow. And so this is a reservoir site and was actually the starting point for my interest in applying this to bare earth context in comparison to my previous research. So this is, like I said before, this is a reservoir site. So there's a highly variable water level, which has over time revealed a large number of features in this area, and two of which are two Neolithic house sites, which are visible to varying degrees. As you can see here, this is the southern site, and you can see the slot trenches, which are quite plainly visible in this regard. But this is the more visible house site, and we'll picture that in a moment. So this is the results of a thermal survey, which was carried out almost 2 years ago to the day. the bottom image here on the left-hand side is a still image, whereas the top right image is a orthophoto. And so these were carried out over the space of 2 days. And as you can see, the slot trenches of the structures are extremely visible in the kernel data, but also a number of other features such as an annex and some pit features, as well as a curvilinear. But it does also present some challenges because, as you can see, there's a bit of variation in the features that are visible, or the visibility of the features between the two images. So between the individual photo and the orthophoto survey, there was an episode of rain which caused a thin layer of water on the ground. This is represented as the blue noise at the bottom left and the two top corners within the orthophoto image, and presents a few considerations for challenges in mission planning or timing. So this is the northern house site, which is a lot less visible due to its presence at a more consistent level of the waterline. So as you can see from the bottom here, the slot trench is still visible in this area. This wasn't actually visible on the ground level at this time because of a thin layer of gravels and silts that had built up over. So this was actually my first time at this site, and I wasn't able to actually identify the location of it until I had flown the thermal camera and spotted this. So the area above it is actually masked by the presence of vegetation and much denser gravels, which like in form of like bushes and trees and stuff like that. So that prevents the visibility in that area. So going forward from this, one of the ideas then was how to apply this to a context, a commercial context. So I was involved in a test excavation site in Dublin, and was carrying out some orthophoto surveys as well in this area. And again, because of the interchangeability of payloads, I had an opportunity to gather some thermal data. In this instance, the thermal contrasted features are less visible, but it is still possible to make them out. So in this instance, this is the ditch feature, one of the ditch features running through here. The problem in this instance is the variation, or the higher and lower temperature values that are within the frame of the image. So prior to now, there was a much more limited option in the software for clipping data values, and these higher and lower thermal contrasts actually impact the visibility of the more subtle features within the image, because it changes the color representation of the thermal values for each pixel based on the range of temperature values that are within the image. So basically, if an archaeologist was to walk into this image, because of the high temperature of their bodies, this would dramatically change the image and make the more subtle features less visible. So software updates since then have allowed a much greater change to the ability to actually clip these images and alter this in a live flight and accentuate these features more, or to increase the visibility of these of more subtle features within the image. So this is another testing site, which is a bit more recent, and as you can see, the thermal contrasts are much more visible here. So these linear anomalies are ditch features that were identified in the magnetometry data and again in testing, and then a pit feature in this area here. So as you can see, the spoil and the vegetation that impacted the visibility of features at the last site, it was much easier to mitigate against this for this site and focus on what we're really interested in. So although the actual values themselves are, although the contrasts themselves are more what we're interested in than the specific temperature values, it is interesting to note that the camera detected a up to 6.4 degree temperature variation between the actual archaeological features and the background soils. This is most likely due to the higher moisture content and most likely due to the higher moisture content. So the magnetometry data available for this site presented the opportunity for a bit of a comparison between the thermal data and the geophysical data. So as you can see, although it is quite clear and nice magnetometry data, there are some very strong results and a distinct negative halo, which masks some of the more subtle features in some areas. But also in particular in regard to areas such as this, which is this in the close-up area. It represents as one individual anomaly, whereas from test trenching and the representation of thermal data, you can see here that it's actually 3 separate anomalies that are closely spaced together. So the next stage of this was to apply it to some full-scale excavations. So this is an initial site in Limerick, and it's a moated site. And as you can see here, it's possible to trace the main enclosure ditch, not only in the open excavation, but coming back around and returning in the greenfield site to the right. So a more thorough application of this presented itself, or the possibility for a more thorough application of this presented itself at another enclosure site in Limerick. And this was identified in geophysics and archaeological testing, test trenching. And some human remains were identified at the site in this area here. And works were halted until full excavation began. So we were carrying out orthophoto surveys at the site, and it afforded the opportunity to again acquire some thermal data and see what was visible in this regard. As you can see from the thermal data, the actual main ditch features themselves, so the annex and the main enclosure, are quite clearly visible as areas of high temperature contrast. But we also identified a number of other features, pit features, and as you'll see in a moment, some potential burials. So these are interpretations here. So in purple are the already known about and under excavation archaeological features such as some pits and the main enclosure. But we also identified some linear anomalies marked up in purple, as well as some interference from barrow tracks and site traffic, which is marked up in grey. So in this instance, the main area of interest is this area here. So these purple anomalies were identified. They're sub-oval anomalies that are roughly east-west aligned, and we interpreted these as potential burial cuts. The light blue areas beside them are areas of thermal contrast, which we interpreted as potential burials that may be superimposed on top of each other, creating this disturbance and creating this contrast, but not a distinct feature in itself, or potentially a bit of modern disturbance. So this is the comparison to the magnetometry data. As you can see, as we know to be typical of burials, they weren't detected in the magnetometry data. So hot off the press yesterday, we actually got a bit of feedback from the site director who sent us on this orthophoto. This is a zoomed-in version of that burial area, and these are the burials that have been identified thus far in this area. So this is an image again of our thermal contrasts and our interpretations. And then this is roughly how it matches up to the actual burial locations themselves. So as you can see, it was possible to identify a number of the burials. Again, this is still under excavation, so there may be more yet to come. But also we can see that we actually underinterpreted the thermal data. So if we go back, we can see an area just here where there's actually further thermal contrast that we didn't interpret, which corresponds to the location of some of the burials as well. We also were able to, on site when the excavations began, we were able to apply a live fly to the thermal with the thermal camera and direct the excavators to these locations for further investigation. And then the area to the bottom, we interpreted it as a bit of thermal noise from site traffic, but this actually corresponds to the location of further burials as well. So it would have masked that signal. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.